Paul Bennewitz was an engineer and a businessman whose interest in UFOs led him to become a member of Arizona's Aerial Phenomena Research Organization in the 1970s. Possibly as a result of what he called his personally funded study into UFOs, which involved him filming and monitoring radio signals from a US airbase, he allegedly became the target of a government misinformation campaign. Join us on Aliens Explored as we delve into the life and times of Paul Bennewitz.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a sceptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
Welcome back, listeners, to Aliens Explored, your weekly podcast where we look at extraterrestrial beings, where we look at UFOs, UAPs, and we look quite often at the people who investigate such things. I am one of your hosts, Stu Jackson.
And I'm your other host, Neil Kelly. How are you doing, Stu?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Very well. Still recovering from last week's episode, which we recorded 5 minutes ago.
5 minutes ago, yeah. But our Halloween special.
Halloween special, yes. Oh no, it's not Halloween anymore. I need to stop doing that now. No, we've got...
in fact, in our world, it's not even Halloween yet.
No.
But it will be by the time this... It will have been and gone by the time this goes out.
It will. In fact, when this goes out, we'll be just coming up to Bonfire Night, which is the 5th of November. So this goes out on the 3rd of November. So I'll be far more terrified because of fireworks. Yeah. There we go. If you're wondering what I'm talking about, listeners, go back and listen to last week's episode and talk about that at length. Yes, now to
loud bangs.
Loud bangs. Now, speaking of people who have been frightened by the concept of aliens, Paul Bennewitz, the UFO investigator, is our subject today. A question I'm often want to ask with you, Neil, on this show. Had you heard of him before?
And I will answer, as I so often do on this show, no.
That's fair.
I hadn't heard of him before.
I think it's probably fair to say there's a number of people in the UFO community who perhaps haven't heard of him.
Perhaps, yeah. I mean, his Wikipedia entry lists him as his occupation as engineer, businessman, conspiracy theorist. So
Wikipedia, yes, that.
So they've got his number.
All facts verified on Wikipedia.
But also, we're going way back in time to the 1970s and early 1980s, aren't we? So we're going back 40 years to when,
particularly the 80s, early 80s. Is when he became infamous, I think, rather than just famous.
Yeah, I mean, there certainly have been movies made on the theme of what happened to him. In fact, there's one supposedly about himself called Mirage Men, where he was targeted by the security services for his participation in a meeting about UFOs and particularly cattle mutilations.
Allegedly,
that was a big thing in the late
security
alleged
forces.
Well, yeah, but that's the story, isn't it? Oh, yeah, they're on to me. I went to this meeting. I'm getting too close to the truth. They're doing stuff to me.
Yes. Well, there are. Well, before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about his life before he got involved in ufology. So he was born in 1927. He was involved in the Second World War. Worked for the Coast Guard as an electrical engineer, radio electrical engineer for the Coast Guard. I'll tell you what, instantly that put me in mind of who did we talk about a few weeks ago? Philip J. Klass, of course, who was also an electrical engineer and then became a UFO debunker. Do you think there's a correlation between electrical engineering and UFOs?
There seems, well, we've noticed a couple of coincidences. I don't know. Do people who are more sort of technically or scientifically minded, are they more interested in science fiction and by extension more interested in the strange happenings that might not be fictional? Is there a kind of chain of items of interest there?
That's a reasonable route to take. I also think it's in the kind of the mindset of engineers to want to understand the universe, to be able to make sense of everything. You know, everything out there has a logical explanation.
Is it also in the mindset of engineers to be very unimaginative, to be very much
no,
fact-based? They're not going to entertain flights of fancy. Is that a trait of engineers? It's a trait of certain kinds of people, isn't it? The male brain that won't even read fiction because what's the point?
I dispute that really strongly, because some of the biggest innovators that the world has ever seen have been engineers with incredible imaginations who imagine marvelous, wondrous things and then go out and build them. I mean, instantly Tesla springs to mind. He had an incredible imagination. He was able to envisage
yes, but
things.
Are they your typical engineer, or are they very atypical engineers? That they've got this strange combination.
Well,
because they can apply themselves to the nuts and bolts, to the hard work, the science, the engineering, but they can also imagine. And imagine things that aren't currently possible. I mean, I remember it was a big thing. I remember someone saying, if you want to have an idea about what the future will be like, don't listen to scientists or engineers. Read science fiction, because they're the guys who can say, well, we can have this and we can have that. Whereas scientists and engineers tend to be rooted in our currently known science or technology. The example they gave was with there's a cartoon character in the United States, less well known outside the US, called Dick Tracy. This detective, and his stories are very much sort of 1940s type, but he had a wrist radio. It was the size of a wristwatch, and it would have an aerial come out, and it would be the speech capture would say, calling Dick Tracy. And people at the time said, well, how is that possible? Because to them, a radio in 1948 or whenever it was a piece of furniture. You know, it required 2 or 3 people to lift it to move it from one side of the room to the other. How could you possibly fit that on your wrist? Where would you put all the valves and all the capacitors and all that you need to make a radio work? Because that was the technology of the time. Whereas the person who wrote it just thought, well, I don't know or care how it works. I just know that he's got this radio on his wrist.
Well, I can come up with a even better example. I mean, that's a fantastic example, but of course, a lot of our listeners will be aware I'm a huge Star Trek fan. And lasers as we understand them today, doors that open automatically when you walk up to them, mobile phones, are all directly influenced specifically by Star Trek.
Okay.
In particular, so yeah, the automatic door wouldn't kind of with the sensor eye on it. There were earlier ones that operated on a pressure plate system, but the electronic ones with the sensor eye, that was created because somebody saw these doors opening and closing in Star Trek and wanted to recreate that.
But also works out how to make turn a beam of light into a switch.
Yeah.
That when you break the beam of light,
yeah.
You set something also used for security systems. You know, when you're trying to break into the bank vault, and there's all those, you have to spray light around to, or you have to spray smoke around so you can see the lights, and you can climb over them and crawl under them.
And that's a convergence with laser
they're all
technology
switches
as well. Interestingly, but the mobile phone. So one of the earliest, I'll say, non-car battery style mobile phones was a Motorola. It was a clamshell. It was the first ever flip phone. It was a clamshell phone called the Motorola StarTAC. And it was called the StarTAC because they wanted to call it the Star Trek, because it was the flip communicators in the original series of Star Trek that directly influenced its creation. But they couldn't get the licensing to call it the Star Trek, so they called it the StarTAC. There we go.
Wow.
So I would say engineers without imagination, no, they've got brilliant imagination. They're people who creatively think of solutions to problems. So creativity is like bags of it.
But isn't being an engineer very much about thinking inside the box? That you're sticking to what rules you know. It's, I don't know. I mean, we're speculating here about the personalities of engineers and whether they are inclined to flights of fancy.
There's a wonderful quote. It was Terry Pratchett wrote it in one of his books, that in order to build castles in the sky, you need to have your feet planted firmly on the ground. I like that.
Okay, I'm going to have to think about that one. But I remember, for instance, it was the fiction writer Arthur C. Clarke who came up with the concept for the communication satellite, because when he was a bored radio technician during World War II, he thought, and radio communications were limited by horizons, that he thought, well, what if you could bounce a signal off something up in the sky and then that would go down, or maybe up in the sky and hit something else up in the sky and something else in the sky and then come down to Earth where you wanted it. So he tried bouncing a signal off the moon, but then realised that the moon's a bit too far away, that your satellites need to be a bit closer. But he's credited with having come up with the idea. Yeah,
absolutely. So we were asking the question of Paul Bennewitz, as an engineer, does that mean he has no imagination? I definitely wouldn't rule out him having an imagination as an engineer.
Okay.
And other ufologists and debunkers alike.
Apologies to any engineers out there that we've insulted by you lack imagination as a necessary function of your career choice.
But he will have had his feet firmly on the ground, definitely. Definitely. He didn't become involved in UFOs till he was in his late 40s, or at least his mid 40s, when he became a member of it. There's a civilian UFO group called APRO. I haven't got that in front. Oh, the Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation.
Okay.
Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation. They're a civilian, very much like MUFON.
Right, and also this was round about the time that cattle mutilations had become associated with UFOs.
They hadn't become associated quite at that specific point. It was starting to head in that direction. I think it was the late 70s, early 80s.
Well, it was in 1979 that US Attorney R.E. Thompson and US Senator Harrison Schmitt held a public meeting about cattle mutilations. Paul Bennewitz attended that meeting, and he claims that that's when the security services latched onto him and started targeting him for whatever reason. But I mean, it does say that Bennewitz then embarked on a personally funded study into UFOs, which he reportedly began filming strange lights and recording unusual radio signals over Kirtland Air Force Base. Well, that's espionage, mate. That's no wonder recording radio signals from a nearby Air Force Base. Yeah, that's espionage.
Well, they'd have to know about it first of all.
Well, if you were, I mean, I don't know how far away he was from it, but if he's sort of sitting out there in the desert with his equipment and monitoring an air, especially if you're going to film strange lights, you've got to be fairly close, haven't you? And then listening to radio transmissions, that's what you're doing, mate.
Yeah, but scanners are, I mean, certainly nowadays, RF scanners are really to a penny, you know. You can get them very easily. I would have thought for a radio engineer, even if he had to make one himself, it wouldn't have been difficult.
But to be sat outside an Air Force base filming lights over it or filming the base, there's a thing in this country, in England, which is very much misunderstood in the rest of the world. There are people who enjoy plane spotting, and it's like train spotting. They will go to an airport and they will hang around and they will spot planes, and they'll have these books which have all the serial numbers of planes in, and they tick them off as they see them, and they're imposing their little bit of order on their own little part of the world. But of course, then they'll go somewhere like Greece or Turkey and do that, or Libya or somewhere like that, and of course. That, or even train spotting, that is something that really is not understood in these other countries, and people have been arrested and on espionage charges, faced really serious offences, and someone's had to go and explain, no, this is actually a thing. Yeah, that they're not actually passing this information on to anyone; they're just collecting it because it's a thing with them.
I very recently had a job where I portrayed a plane spotter. So I was very much in that frame of mind for 4 solid days. I talked to real plane spotters and, interesting people. Interesting in inverted commas. But
yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, you go to somewhere like Clapham Junction Station and you'll see them there on the end of the platform with their notebooks and their cameras.
Train spotters, yes.
Spotting trains.
Not plane spotters
the same way.
Junction.
Not plane spotters, no, you'll spot them, near the airport.
Yeah. So, yes, he's making himself known to the authorities. He gets involved in a UFO case. A woman calling herself Myrna Hansen. There was a movie star called Myrna Hansen. This wasn't her.
From some time ago, she won the Miss USA title in 1953.
The movie star, yes, who is
the
not the same person we're talking about. To be clear.
This is a different Myrna Hansen.
Different Myrna Hansen, who had seen a UFO, basically pulling it. Well, you see the picture behind me. This idea of cattle being lifted up into a UFO via a bright light, a tractor beam, if you will. That particular case is where that imagery comes from, because that's what she saw or claims to have seen.
She described a story involving interplanetary visitors, bright lights, and herds of cattle.
Yes.
And there was a particular police officer, a highway patrol officer, in a New Mexico state police officer and New Mexico Gaming Control Board investigator, but he was also regarded as the cattle mutilation guy. So everything that came through about that was passed to him. And he, in turn, contacted Paul Bennewitz.
Oh, that was Valdez, wasn't it?
Gabe Valdez,
yeah,
the police officer.
Yes.
Yeah. Now, the interesting idea of this woman calling herself Myrna Hansen. Top tip for any of our listeners: if ever you, for some reason, you need to go somewhere and you need a new identity, pick a name of a famous person. Pick a name of a film star. Not, John Wayne might be a bit obvious, but if you go for something like James Stewart or Jamie Lee Curtis or Jamie Curtis or whatever, pick a famous name, because then people can't Google you. People try and look you up, and they just get this masses and masses of stuff about the far more famous person of that name. Don't call yourself Adolf Hitler or something like that. Anything that
but also don't
raise
call
eyebrows,
yourself.
But
but don't call yourself Stu Jackson or Neil Kelly either. No, I don't want to go too much into Myrna Hansen's case, because I want us to talk about that as a specific episode, because there's a lot of detail in that.
Okay, I just wanted to say though that if someone has a name that you don't think is their actual name and they happen to share it with a famous person, that's a good clue that it's not their real name.
That's a way to spot it.
Yeah.
So Paul Bennewitz, he investigates that case and becomes increasingly, I'm going to choose my words incredibly carefully here, he becomes increasingly disturbed by what he's hearing about the apparent potential for alien attack. And it becomes quite overwhelming to him. Until December 1981, he writes to a US senator that he makes some really bizarre or seemingly bizarre claims. He says he knows the location of alien bases in northern New Mexico. And we're talking about Dulce, New Mexico. Now, again, people might have heard of the Dulce alien base, but not heard of Paul Bennewitz. It's actually Paul Bennewitz who brought Dulce onto the UFO map, as it were. So he claims that he knew the location of alien bases, one of which in Dulce. He knew that in this letter to the senator, he claimed he knew that someone in the military had made a deal with the aliens several years ago. And indeed, that is something we actually keep hearing time and again from different sources. So when we look at Project Serpo, for example. But he claims that this deal gave Native American land away to the aliens, gave cattle away, and assurance of safety to the aliens in exchange for technology in the form of an atomic-powered ship. He claims that basically the military had abandoned development of certain weapons. He claims that...
Did he say why they'd abandoned them? Were they because they realised they were dealing with something obsolete, or was it just that it was technology that was beyond them?
Because the aliens, there was an argument between the military and the aliens over these weapons. So, the weapons development was stopped, and the people involved in the weapons development disappeared. He claims that, this atomic ship was 30 years behind the aliens' current level of technology. And that's very specific, 30 years. Doesn't sound like much for something like that.
Not for something that's maybe hundreds of years ahead of us in terms of technology. I mean, I remember when the Challenger space shuttle exploded. And one of the things that came out about it was that it was very old technology, because it takes such a long time to develop something like this. So when you go from the drawing board to you finally got your completed craft. Yeah, that's 30 years later. So all sorts of new ideas have come along since then, but not incorporated into unless you're adapting the design as you go along. But then you never finish. I mean, I've worked on software programs like that where there's always something new, and you think, well, yeah, we're doing this. No, oh no, let's abandon that bit and we'll do this new thing instead. It never ends. You just think, okay, we need to. It's very difficult to control a project when you've got people like that on it saying, oh no, we need to keep up with the latest.
Yes.
We need to.
The other thing Paul Bennewitz claimed in this letter to this senator is he knew of 2 adults and 1 child. This was in Texas, near Austin, who came close to this atomic-powered ship and were exposed to radiation from it.
And now we're talking about the Cash Landrum affair, aren't we?
We are
Something we
talking
discussed
about
in a very early episode.
which we discussed back in, oh my goodness, long time ago it seems, looking back.
It's a very long time ago. I can tell you.
It's one of our previous episodes anyway. You can find it by searching our...
It was episode 59.
59,
so
there you go. Well done.
Yeah, so this is 100 episode. We're nearly 100 episodes on since then, but that was Betty Cash and Vicky Landrum and Vicky Landrum's grandson who were driving home on a lonely road when they encountered this craft and suffered burns.
Yes, radiation.
Proximity.
Poisoning, basically, from it. So he knows that was part of it. And he knew that the government was quietly paying their hospital expenses as well. He was also said he'd sent a copy of this letter to the president because he was worried the president wasn't being kept up to date on this sort of thing.
So this would have been Ronald Reagan, wouldn't it?
1981.
That president.
December 1981.
Yeah, it would have been that president.
Right. I mean, it's... Yeah. He later, a few years later, refers to a 1979 conflict at this base in Dulce, where aliens and humans were said to have had basically a firefight.
The Dulce War.
The Dulce War, indeed. Again, that's something I want us to do in an episode of its own because there's a lot to that. But all his claims are things that have cropped up in other stories and from other sources. It sounds bizarre and incredible and outlandish, and certainly when you become aware... So a few years after that again, so by the late 80s, Paul Bennewitz did seem to be mentally ill as a result of this. He was having issue. There was a thing with his wife. I can't remember if he was saying that his wife was an extraterrestrial or being controlled by extraterrestrials or something like that. And he ended up being hospitalised. He was barricading himself in his home and things like that. Ended up being hospitalised as a result of this. I mean, not permanently.
Yes, he accused his wife. August 1988, accused his wife of being under the control of the extraterrestrials. Well, he said being in control of the extraterrestrials. I assume that means under the control of, rather than that she was controlling them.
I seem to recall it was either an extraterrestrial or under the control of the not in control of extraterrestrials. That would take some doing, I would have thought. But yeah, I mean, we say he was hospitalised. Now, to be fair, he was kept in for a month and then released, but he was he was given treatment thereafter. He passed away only in 2003, so, it's survived another sort of 15 years after that.
Now, there's a guy turned up in 1989, so a year later, just about, a guy called William Leonard Moore, author of, he co-authored 2 books with Charles Berlitz, including The Roswell Incident, a UFO researcher, was prominent in the 70s and 80s. He revealed that he tried to push Bennewitz into a mental breakdown by feeding him false information about aliens. Apparently this was corroborated by a declassified CIA document that claims Moore and another officer of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, a Richard Doty, were responsible for a disinformation campaign against Bennewitz. Although in this usually a disinformation campaign, you're spreading misinformation about someone. They seem to have been feeding him information that would kind of drive him over the edge.
Well, and I suppose giving him information that could easily be disproved is also a tactic of the UFO disinformation.
Yeah, so you'll say something that that can easily be disproven or ridiculed. Yes. There's a chap called Howard Bloom, author and journalist, formerly a reporter for The Village Voice, New York Times, contributed to Vanity Fair. And he, in his book, Out There, The Government's Secret Quest for Extraterrestrials, he said that the government had sent undercover agents to befriend and mislead Bennewitz using counterfeit documents.
Well, the Blooms, so it was a husband and wife UFO research team. The Blooms.
The Blooms.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Interesting. So it's really hard to make it. Obviously, the guy did have mental health issues. It sounds like that was heavily exacerbated by the disinformation brigade when it comes to UFOs. It was exploited by the sounds of it. Yeah. But why would they go to such lengths to discredit him? If it was all. That's the question.
Do you think in the UFO community it's largely people who at one point express an interest in UFOs, something's captured their imagination, but it kind of tails off after a bit? Or do you think it's more that there are people who they'll latch onto something and just become more and more and more involved and convinced and whatever, because they would be the ones, especially if they're going out filming Air Force bases and interrupting radio traffic or intercepting radio traffic. You would think, these people are actually involved in something akin to espionage.
It's something that we all, as human beings, I think we're all susceptible to this. We talked about it a couple of episodes ago as well. It's confirmation bias. That is the biggest enemy to finding out the truth, because, what happens, it isn't that people become disinterested. They come in with a belief. They'll only take into account information, facts, evidence that supports their belief, and they'll dismiss information, facts, and evidence that doesn't support their beliefs, and they become more and more entrenched. And every time you try and present people with a different perspective, the more entrenched they become. That's just a human nature thing. Yeah.
Well, and it's how cults work as well. That's how you get people lured into a cult.
It's how cults work. It's how partisan politics works as well. It's how we ended up with Brexit. That thing that nobody ever cared or reported on or talked about until we were told to care and talk about it, and and then suddenly it's the biggest issue in the world, where it had been a non-issue for decades. Anyway, that's getting by the by. And that works on both sides of the fence, by the way, just saying.
So it is a thing that there are people who, because of their interest in UFOs, like Paul Bennewitz, that, they do get, apparently, if this is to be believed, they get targeted by the government. Yeah, they are literally the guy who found out too much, who got too close to the truth. And, they begin a campaign of basically driving him insane.
It would seem to be the case here.
Making him ill.
Would seem to be the case here. Of course, we've only got people's word. We've only got testimony to that. We haven't got factual proof.
No, there never is any evidence, just testimony.
So that leads us to our final question that we always like to ask. Neil, do you think Paul Bennewitz was telling the truth?
Do you think he's telling the truth? You might want to watch the 2013 documentary Mirage Man, which is apparently is based on, covers that subject. But in the meantime, or perhaps after watching that, tell us what you think, listeners. We'd love to hear from you via all the usual means.
You avoided my question, Neil.
And what question is that?
Do you believe Paul Bennewitz?
I thought you wanted me to ask the listeners.
No, I'm asking you. I mean, I do want to know what the listeners think, but before we get to that, I want to know what you think. Was he telling the truth?
Telling the truth about what? I mean, he became convinced all those things about the base in New Mexico and the. I believe that he believed it. He says, I know that someone in the military made a deal with the aliens several years ago. I believe he believes that happened. I'm not sure that... I don't believe that happened. I don't believe that our governments have had any contact with extraterrestrials, as you know. And I'm gonna hold that line on this one. I don't think... I don't know why he was targeted by the security services, apart from he was involved in acts that, to me, look like espionage.
Well, he definitely had his phone bugged, and he had surveillance devices placed in his home. That's not under question. That definitely happened.
But he was also, he was spying on military bases, so they start spying back on him.
There we go.
That's going to happen. I'm not convinced that it was because he got too close to the truth about US government cooperation with extraterrestrials.
Well, I think he's someone who got close enough to the truth to convince himself. At which point, a person would say that they know a thing that no longer that they believe. But I think it was a case of he believed it because he didn't have the proof. He just he'd.
We've had this discussion with people before. Someone says, "I know for a fact," when actually they believe.
Yeah, exactly.
They have reason to believe.
I think that's where he was, and I think he was. I honestly think he was close to the truth, and that's why he had this campaign against him that was ultimately successful, I would say. But as you rightly said earlier, we want to know what our listeners think about Paul Bennewitz. Is there aspects to the story that we've missed, aspects that we've glossed over, or is there more to it? Is there less to it? Let us know what you think via the usual means. You can email us aliensexplored@gmail.com. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. And whilst you're at YouTube, give us a cheeky like and hit that notification icon so that you get notified of all our various videos. And of course, if you are one of our Patreon subscribers, and all it costs is just £2 a month, then you get access to our exclusive Discord server, and you help us to carry on doing what we love and what we hope you enjoy as well. Join us next time when, we're going to be talking about the Crystal Skulls, not the Indiana Jones movie, That was terrible. But the actual real crystal skulls. So don't miss that one. In the meantime, keep watching all these people who claim to know things, because you never know, they just might. And of course, keep watching the skulls. Take care for now.
Catch you next time. Bye bye.
Aliens Explored is a Figo Films production in association with Juicy Fomes. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.